Hello and welcome to Four Simple Questions. My name is Iwan Briok. In this, our second episode of the first series, taking the Four Simple Questions challenge is Professor Paul Gilbert and Kelly Spencer. Professor Gilbert is a clinical psychologist based at the University of Derby, and his area of research is compassion towards ourselves and others, and shows how these are fundamental elements of our mental health and well-being. Kelly Spencer is a non-duality teacher, and the message is articulated through Kelly with such warmth and rawness that on repeated listening, deepen. So Christmas in the UK feels very Dickensian, and I don't mean the snow. After 12 years of Conservative government in the fifth largest economy in the world, millions of people can't afford to heat their homes. Millions more depend on charity for food. This is what leadership without compassion looks like. And yet in the field of clinical psychology, there is one ubiquitous voice that challenges compassion, saying that the road to hell is paved with good intention. This is why for Paul Gilbert, compassion involves the courage to listen deeply to the suffering of ourselves and others, and to unwrap the gift therein of wisdom. And in meeting Kelly, he finds a person who has done this so assiduously that, well, I'm going to stop there because I really want you to listen to this and what it means to live a life of service when you are liberated. I hope you enjoy. Season's greetings if your area of the world celebrates Christmas. And I'll see you in the new year.
Here we go. And it says winter sparkle as well. And the question is, who are you? That's an interesting question, isn't it?
That's a really interesting question. I really like that question. I think I like it because of the pause, the not knowing the answer to it, and also it reveals a beauty in that question.
I suppose for me, the trouble is for me, of course, you immediately think as a psychologist, who am I? Oh, I'm this, I'm that, and you put all these labels on yourself, but they're really identifiers for your audience. But what one is that's a very different question. Yeah. And so we don't really know. I mean, we can identify a body and, you know, I'm a man and so on and so on, but is there anything beyond that, really?
Yeah. I feel like there are two parts to it. Like, you can say those things, like I am a woman, I'm black, I'm a mother, I'm British. I can say all these things, and those things are beautiful. They have a beauty to them and a truth to them. But then also there's this other side that isn't often spoken about. This side that doesn't necessarily have those names as labels to it, but it's there, it's here, it's you could say it's equally relevant, it's equally acknowledgeable, and I feel like we don't look at that part of things. We focus more on those labels, those identities that we are.
Yeah, that's such an important point, isn't it? Because some spiritual traditions ask us to see beyond those labels, beyond the sense of a self, that the self is actually an illusion created by these brains that we have. But there's also an issue for me that I'm interested in is one's values, and I suppose if I was to be asked who I am, I'd like to talk about the things I value. So there are identities like, you know, being a man and so on, but the values, like, you know, obviously I'm very keen on compassion. That's partly why we're here. So they would be important for me, even beyond or below those other distinctions about the nature of consciousness itself, really.
I think those parts of us are important to mention into the values, what you believe, what your preferences, what you think is important. Definitely relevant. But there's also this other side that's overlooked and not put that spotlight on. You know, we don't tend to give it that much attention, and I think that's, I would say, it's hard to say, but that's who I essentially am. That formlessness, that namelessness, that not a thing. But as well as that, I'm also a human. I'm also these values and preferences and descriptions. Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Matthew Ricard is a Buddhist. He was the French translator to the Dalai Lama, would say, your mind is like water. It can contain a poison or a medicine, but it's neither of those things, right? And because water is clear and pure, it doesn't really understand that it can contain things, but not be the thing it contains. And so, you know, it's like our minds contain these passions and these feelings and these ones, but it's not what it contains. Those are things that we share between humanity, but what is the purity? What is the water? What is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, what's that bit?
Yeah.
You know, that's that existence of being, what you called formlessness of being. I think that is such an important thing. But not many people get access to that, but you have had access to that, haven't you?
Yeah. I feel really blessed to have had that pointed out and revealed. I feel really, really blessed about that.
So that's become an important way in which you experience yourself now.
It's I think when I saw myself as just this human being, these preferences, these identities, I think more than there was a lot of suffering, a lot of problems because of that, not knowing like where I am or what I am, and trying to find a platform within identities, within these labels, you know, of being human. And so a lot of suffering comes back not knowing who you are ultimately. I feel so. Yeah, I feel really blessed to have come across such a message pointing to begin to explore that and begin to open up to a different possibility, that I'm not what I thought I was.
It's also very much it's an experience, isn't it? You experience yourself in a different way. Yeah. I mean, I've meditated for a while. Occasionally you get glimpses of it, but not hugely. Where some people can just sort of slip into it for all kinds of reasons, and particularly stress actually they have these insights and these changes of how they perceive, and it sounds like that's what's happened for you. So you actually experience these domains of consciousness separately from, well, not separately, but they're not what all of that suffering was about, you know, which is to do what your brain's doing. But there is a part of you that's separate from that, different from that.
Yeah. It felt like I was like a misidentification with what I wasn't, in a way. I mean, I am that, but I wasn't solely that. So this misplacement of who I was caused that sense of suffering, that sense of, you know, desperateness to try and find, what can I stand on? Who am I? Where do I, you know, where am I? Who am I? You know, yeah.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, it's fascinating. Fascinating, yeah.
Okay, so question 2. And it's a wreath, is it? Wreath?
Yes,
Winter wishes. The question is, what is this?
it's a card.
Yes.
I think there's... I mean, these are the great questions, aren't they? And people develop religions and all kinds of things because we have a consciousness that's aware of our existence, but also aware of our non-existence. That we will grow and we will die. And so people ask these questions: is this all that there is? Then is that it? We're just a biological thingy, and nobody really knows the answer. And I think some of the experience you talk about is so important because it's sort of helping us to recognize that maybe there is different dimensions to the universe. There are different dimensions of consciousness. So we're not just biological forms. Biological forms, they come and they go and they come and they go. But there is something beyond that, which is to do with this, the experiencing that you talk about, the experiencing, and that is the grounding. That's the Buddhists call it the grounding of all being, that which gives rise to, the universe and so on. So but it's such a tricky thing because you can't measure it. It's not like science. You can go out and kind of measure it and measure this neuron in the brain or whatever. How do you measure it? How do you see it? It's not like light or gravity or something. So you can only experience it. And so I think that's why your experiences are so important, because that's the only way you get access to it. There is no other way, not that we know of, how you get access to consciousness. It's the only way you can understand it is by how you experience these multiple levels.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I like how you say that, the importance of experiencing it rather than a belief or a dogma. It's actually the experience that's necessary.
Yes,
yeah.
That's right. It's that experience. People try and generate these experiences, because we're doing some research on psilocybin, which is giving people different experiences of mind. And interconnectedness is a very common experience that people have, and how you can create opportunities for people to have the experiences that you have, because some people can meditate for years and years, like me, and don't necessarily experience it in any great depth. They can sense it, but not really experience it. So I think that, the kind of things you talk about are really priceless, aren't they, really? Was it a slow process for you? Or did it sort of happen gradually? Or?
Yeah, I would describe it as a gradual process. I would describe it as that. Like it's in one way it isn't slow. It's right here. It's ever present. It's not. It can't be in time. And yet at the same time, I would describe it as a gradual awakening to that, like a slow disappearing of that sense of individualness and that sense of I am separate from all. But yeah, at the same time, it's right here, and it's not a gradual thing in time that happens.
Isn't that fascinating? A slow disappearance of something. I think that's a wonderful way of thinking about it. A slow disappearance, a slow dissolving. Yeah. Fantastic, yeah.
So what is this? It just feels really beautiful. What is this? Like it's raw and it's not known. You can't put it into a jar or label it as something. It's so primary. Like it's instant. It's not in time. But to try to say what this is it is impossible. You could label it and call it all these things, but the experience of it isn't in that labeling or naming of it. It is.
What's interesting is the way you talk about it is obviously, you smile a lot when you talk about it. Like there's a joyfulness in it, isn't there? There's a blissfulness in it. There's a peacefulness in it. All of these kind of elements seem part of it. So come back to the question of what is this? I suppose a lot depends on what you decide this, the definition of this. I mean, here we are, we're in a room. This is a room. But I think the idea is that what is it that gives rise to this, really? That's the question. What gives rise to this? Rooms and people and life and blah, blah. And that's, we were saying that you can really only experience that. You can't really measure that state of consciousness that exists within the field of consciousness, how you can actually experience that. So the way you talk about it is, it also is a state of joyfulness, which I think is really interesting. That,
Yeah. I think people ask that question, they often want that kind of meaning to this. What's the point, or where is it heading, or something? Like, is this life does it have a purpose for me? What do I do? What do I, what's it for? And it feels really beautiful that the possible answer to that question is within what's actually happening. It's here. It's not something that you imagine it's going to be in time. I can learn the answer. There's a purpose in the future that I can work towards and reach. Whereas the way that it's spoken about here and the way it's expressed here, it is more that the answer to that is actually right here. It's not in time. That mind kind of reality is actually right here. And then this sense of being something separate, individual from everything else, it gives rise to that sense of longing and missing something and incompleteness. And so as this, we call it awakening, begins to happen, it's so self-evident that what's being looked for is actually right here. The answer is right here. And it couldn't be anywhere else because there is nowhere else other than what is actually arising or appearing, which causes beauty, that joy and that love and that beauty that you mentioned.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think that's really interesting. That is, it's because it comes with these emotion textures. It's not sort of cold or indifferent or harsh, or it comes with these emotion textures of joyfulness and insight and understanding and things making sense. When people talk about these experiences, all of that combination of experience, things make sense and there is no ultimate purpose, it is what it is. So I think that's a fascinating experience, really. It's quite different from the views that, we're all souls, we have to learn lessons and blah, blah, blah. It's a very different way of thinking about the nature of mind and the nature of the universe and the nature of consciousness. Yeah. Fascinating. There's a lovely analogy in Buddhism, and there are two waves in the Pacific rushing across towards the Big Sur in America, and they've got lots of rocks and mountains there. And the waves are coming, and the big wave said to the little wave, "Oh, this is terrible. We're all going to be smashed to pieces. There are rocks ahead. It's the end for us. There's foam everywhere." And the little wave says, "No, you'll be absolutely fine. Don't worry." And the big wave says, "Oh, that's only because you can't see what I see." And the little wave says, "Yeah, but you see, you're not a wave, you're water." And that whole principle about, the identification with the form that is created as opposed to the process is a key thing. So that's something I'm very interested in, about how we make that distinction between I'm not a wave, I'm water, is really quite crucial. And a lot of meditation, when you're doing meditation, is to try and get that sense of being oceanic. It's like an oceanic feeling, a connectedness to all things, not just this part that we call our ego or our self or whatever, which is very short-lived, really. We don't last very long, during 60, 70 years, whatever. So these are such important things. I mean, if you was to think about how, you've obviously been through a lot of very painful experiences, how you would help other people going through the sorts of painful experiences you were going through, and tapping into these dimensions that we're talking about, would there be anything that you would want them to know or advise them to do, or is it just has to happen by itself? Or
You mean if they were looking into this subject? You mean?
Yeah, I mean, if they were looking
into,
somebody was going through the kind of unpleasant experience you had to go through, how would you support them?
I think I would first of all recommend them see a psychotherapist or something, or a counsellor. Practical support, and also exploring into this subject and nature of things, as well as that.
Because everybody asks the questions, Because, when you sit here, you're so serene. Everybody asks the questions, but how to? How can I do it? How can I do it?
Yeah.
So that's what everybody wants to know. How can I do it?
Yeah.
How can I do
It's
it?
really quite sweet, really. It's quite beautiful innocence, like,
Yes.
to ask, how can I get there? How can I have it? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a question people want to, and then they start grasping for it, don't they? But I think that, the way you sort of describe it, it's slow, it's a dissolving of something, which allows then an opening of something. I think that's a lovely way to describe it, actually, yeah. So, I don't know if we've answered the question what this is, but we've sort of focused around it. Okay, let's look at question 3. Here we go. So question 3 then, we have here a snowman. Isn't that nice? A snowman. And the question is, why is this? Okay, so what? Now we're on to the why.
Why? Why is this?
Again, I think that's quite, there have been so many efforts to explore that through religion and different gods and all of that stuff. It's such a tricky question, isn't it? Why? I mean, we can look at how and all that stuff, but what do we mean by why? An ultimate why? Or, it depends where we put the why question. Why do we exist? Well, we have DNA, we've been built. But why is there DNA? And why do atoms exist? And why does the universe exist? And why does the laws of physics exist? There are so many whys, isn't there, really, about the actual, what consciousness floats on, as it were, But the why of why it exists, why does something exist rather than nothing, I mean, that's just really tricky. That's very tricky. So I don't really have any answers to that at all.
I feel like the previous question kind of, well, what is this? I think once that begins to be seen, like that this is happening, then the why and the how and the all that kind of becomes really irrelevant. It just doesn't arise those kinds of questions, because it so is. It doesn't need a why. It's happening, and then the why can be seen to be something again in time, something to do with a mental understanding of something or a mental concept of something, giving it an origin and a purpose as to why. But once this is seen, or this is not belonging anymore in that sense of personhood, then that question becomes really irrelevant as to why this is happening. This is, we can put the theories to things like why his hand is moving, what's happening in the brain to cause the hand to move, but actually we don't really know anything. We can't know anything. We can only know our human invented ideas and language again. So yeah, it moves beyond that question, really.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating that you say that it moves beyond the questions of what and why. I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because, the why questions are all, they're the cause and effect, cause and effect, that's what they are. That's what science is about, what causes and what effects. But what you're saying is that when you experience these states of consciousness itself, it's sort of timelessness, there is no why or not why or...
Yeah.
Have I understood that?
There's no room for the why. Like it's so full and complete. Like the why doesn't fit anywhere. Where would you put that why? It just is. Like
What fascinating.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating. It's just so full and complete.
Yeah.
There's no room for it. That's interesting. That's an interesting thought. That's interesting. Yeah, well, in our approach, we see biological life as a bit of a disaster. because it's based upon life, death, and decay, right? And a lot of life is predatory. One life has to feed off another, otherwise it won't survive. Viruses, bacteria, all that stuff. And the Buddha originally got into suffering by being confronted when he was late adolescence, because he'd lived in a golden past, by death, disease, and decay, aging. And it was such a shock to him. So that really is the big question, People often try to say, oh, this is a wonderful life, isn't it? But no, not really. When you look under the covers, there's immense suffering in life, in both for animals and for humans. And we need to understand that we can be contributors to that suffering by being unpleasant to each other and going to war and being vicious. But we can also use our minds to be helpful, to recognize, actually, for whatever reason, biological life is not a nice process, and helping people realize that biological life is actually not a particularly nice process, and the Buddha said the same thing, is difficult because people want to turn it into this, oh, no, it's lovely, and, we've been created, and, oh, this. So what happens when you come along with your experiences, you just sort of sweep that just gently to the side?
I don't think that's how I feel anyway. That's not how I perceive what I'm speaking about. I don't at all sweep it to the side. I fully embrace that. I fully embrace the suffering and the pain that comes from being human, the loss. Yeah, I totally embrace that.
Yes. That was a miss. Thank you so much for the correction, because that's a miss. I didn't quite mean the way it was said. I didn't. I apologise for that. So yes, but there is something beyond it, as it were. Was in my work, I would love that to be the case, but I'm not sure because I haven't had your experience, right? So because this is all that I know, that's all I can work on. It's the biological suffering, really. Because I don't know how to help people get to your state. That's the big issue. If they could get to your state, that would be fantastic. Then I'd go out of business, that'd be wonderful. But how do you get people to experience what you've experienced? Because people can sit in the monasteries for years and they don't.
Yeah, I think suffering can actually play a part in that. I think suffering can drive that deeper looking for freedom, for peace, for happiness. So yeah, I think it can be a wonderful tool for transformation, actually, and deeper inquiry. But like what I'm speaking about doesn't exclude that suffering or that pain. It's actually deeply within it. Like it holds all things, good and bad. And that's often what people want to avoid: the pain, the suffering, the hurt. But actually, this experience, whatever we want to call it, it has all things in it. It's all things, and so you can't avoid or run away from these negative experiences. They're part of life, and to try to avoid them, you're avoiding life. You're avoiding something, and that to me is actual suffering, not pain or not hurt or. The suffering is about this one who's trying to avoid avoid life, be separate from it. I would call that suffering. Yeah, I think there can be a beauty in awful situations. That it can transform people's experiences. Losing someone, losing something. So yeah, people often want to come to this sort of thing, wanting to escape life, actually, wanting to escape the pain and live in that joy that, which is fair enough, but this is a big surprise to them, is that you can't avoid that. Life is all things, both sides of the coin. So
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's fascinating, because my entry into compassion has always been through anger. Because I grew up in a fairly religious background, and loving God and all that. And then suddenly started to realize it's not quite like that. And if you think about the Romans and the Holocaust and, slavery and all of that stuff, humans are vicious, they're absolutely vicious. And so the idea of compassion was really about, I don't want to live in a world like this. I don't want to live in a world where there is diseases. I don't want to live in a world where people are so vicious to each other. I don't want that. I didn't choose to be here. I don't want to be in that world. I don't think that's a very good world. So I do battle with it. I have personal battles with it.
When I was younger, I had a similar feeling of I don't want to be here. I didn't pick to come here. It's so cruel. It's so it created a lot of suffering in me actually.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think it's an important point, isn't it? That journey is partly generated by that. I don't want this. It's a sort of an anger rebellion against suffering, which is, I think, important for the beginning of a journey.
Yeah, I think there's this. To me, it's like a planting of a seed in a way. Like this sense of like, as we're born into this and we become seemingly separate, this identity forms and this personality forms, and we look out and we see the world, we see what is being shown to us. It's natural feelings. I think I've lost heaven. I've lost this innocence, this pureness, this they might call it, heaven in Christian terms. But that seed is then that whole movement to try and find what is wrong, what have I lost, what's missing. It's quite a beautiful thing, I think, to happen. But yeah, it's painful. It's painful.
It's painful. Yes.
Yeah, it's painful. It's not. It's for the strong. Yes. This journey of looking.
Yes.
I want to know what this is, why I'm here.
Yes.
Yes, it's a very challenging journey.
Very challenging.
To be a human.
No, it's very challenging. And I love what you were saying earlier, because when I said, pushing the suffering way back, because it doesn't stop us in any way from like developing a vaccine for COVID. It doesn't say, it doesn't really matter, it's probably live, if you die, you die.
Yeah, there's no one here, it's fine.
It's not that.
Yeah.
In fact, it's quite the opposite. The kinds of states you're talking about really does motivate you to be helpful. Yeah. It's not it doesn't matter then. It produces much, like turning up today and wanting to talk about your experience. It does produce a real desire to be helpful.
I feel like that word compassion is something that I'm only recently understanding or thinking about.
Me too.
Oh, really? Yeah, and there is this genuineness about being used in a way, letting life use this form, this expression, and leaving aside the egoic. So what I want for me and my life and my children and myself, that is there naturally as being a human. I want to make sure that my needs are met and I'm catered for. Mm-hmm. But then there's this part that wants to also be used and be led to be of service and to give back. There's a natural part of that that's grown over the years of being speaking about this.
But that's wonderful, isn't it, when you say a natural growth of wanting to be of service?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? That's really...
But it feels really natural, like once you're full up, like you can then overflow in that way, and you want to be of service in that way. Yeah.
It's a lovely way of putting it, isn't it? Want to be of service, and
but it's not a service to help others in a way. It's not about I want to help others. I want to be helpful to others. It's more just a love, an outpouring of love, and a giving from love, as opposed to a personal, I want to help you because I feel you need this or that. It's more of just an outpouring of love that wants to give, wants to pour out, Yeah.
That's great.
So it isn't like me being a good person, trying to be a good person.
That's brilliant, that's
It's
brilliant.
more just a natural compulsion or outpouring.
That's a lovely way of talking about it, isn't it? It's just a natural process, an outpouring. Fascinating.
Okay, question 4.
Question 4.
So this is a chandelier of some kind. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
What is it like to be you?
Well, I think as we've been discussing between us, right, it's confusing.
Yeah.
I mean, all the things that we've talked about in terms of the tapestries of one's life, one's family, one's career, blah, 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 blah. There's all of those things. But like everyone, I suppose, I live with questions, unanswered questions. And some of the questions, I think, as we've discussed today, can only be approached or answered is maybe the wrong word, through experience. There isn't any other way of doing that, right? So it doesn't matter how many thousands of books I read or whatever it is, I'll never get to the answer that way. And so that's why understanding the path to enlightenment or awakening is such an important thing, really. So I'm just a person that struggles with unanswered questions, and I find the world a very tricky place, and see what we can do to be helpful. But probably I'm coming a little bit more from an ego position, but nevertheless we try and do our best.
What's it like to be me? It's difficult to answer, isn't it? What's it like? It's interesting. It's lots of things. It's like being open and being vulnerable. Yeah, it's hard to explain. Like it's a raw experience where anything can happen and anything does happen, and it's being like blown about in the wind, let's say, or it's being exposed to everything that could potentially happen, and all these seeming things appear, emotions appear, thoughts appear, behaviours appear, and it's like being open to that and feeling all of that. So while all this is happening, there's this love and this beauty, regardless of the wind blowing and being moved around here and there and the emotions. There's always this love, this empty fullness, this empty love. And I suppose it's a learning as well how to be human, how to be more compassionate and be truthful as to the experience. That makes sense. Like it's just being open to everything and being able to be truthful to it. Yeah. It's like riding a wave or something on the ocean, and yet at the same time it's also still and free. but there's no avoiding of that ocean movements, you know. Like it's one and the same thing.
It's fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yes, it's fascinating. Sometimes in the Buddhist traditions, they say we often are like corks on the sea, being bounced around in the waves and by the climate. But eventually the cork fills up, and gradually sinks. And as it sinks, it realizes things become stiller and stiller and stiller and fuller and fuller and fuller. You talk a lot about this word. You use this word love a lot, but of course, love can mean lots of different things. And when you talk about it, can you describe it a little bit about how? Because it's not the same as human love, is it? I love you, I love you. It's not like that, isn't it? I love myself. I love myself. I'm going to give love to myself. It's not that. It's a very different texture, if I understand it. It's a texture of interconnectedness, I think. Is that right?
Yeah. I use wholeness as well as a wholeness, yeah. But it is that it's not like a separateness as of I love you as a personal thing. It's wholeness. It's like the nature of reality is this empty stillness, but also this full loveness. Like it's
I think it's a wonderful way of thinking, isn't it? That love, not to think about it of love as we do in the West, blah blah blah. But what you're talking about is an experience of wholeness of everything, which we call that love, but it's a different texture of experience.
It definitely is different. Yeah, I used to see love as being a personal thing that I could get from someone or give to someone as an objective thing, a limited thing, but. That's more about the personal kind of interpretation of it, or the personal trying to grasp at something beyond itself that it can't possibly know or understand, but it attempts to and say, "I love you, I love this." But I think it is the same love. It's just that the individual person will see it in a different way, as a separate way, in a separate ownable way. But I'd say everything is love. Everything is that love, and it can't be split into parts. Objectified.
Because in my area, we have a lot of trouble with the word love. Because people misunderstand it. They think because love often means liking. So I'm going to like.
Yeah, or a feeling, some
feeling,
kind of emotion.
Like a feeling. So but the way you're talking about it, it's an experience of wholeness. That's a very different way of thinking about love.
Yeah, and it's not personal.
It's not
makes
not,
it
not
unconditional.
personal.
Yeah.
And in some of the people who, particularly, I have to say, some of our middle class colleagues who've taken on compassion and think it's all about love, but it's very sentimental. It's not really what you're talking about. It's not about experiencing this wholeness. And then this overflowing of the wish to be of service, as you say, that comes naturally arises from an experience of wholeness.
Yeah,
I think that texturing, I think, is such an important point that you make. Really, it's not a personal "I love you, you love me."
I think it's great for us to work as a society to work towards being more loving.
Yes.
But this is not a personal love like that.
Yeah.
I think the person or the human can't love like that. It will be about me and about what I want and it's a personal kind of.
What you just said there is really important. A person can't love like that.
Yeah.
You can experience wholeness, you can experience love, but a person can't love like that. I think that's really fascinating. That's a fascinating way of thinking. It's totally different.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Really beautiful.
Yeah. Great.
It takes it out of our hands, so to speak. It's like, yeah.
It's perfect. It's great. It's true. It is quite profound. And obviously the way you talk about it, it's been a profound transformation. But of course we always keep coming back as to if other people could taste this.
Yeah.
it would indeed be. It would change everything.
Yeah. I feel these talks that I do and others do as well are about the tasting of it, the tasting of it, because it's right here. It's not special or obscure or, in like one off. It's actually what is. It's here right now. So it's not, it's special, but it's not special at the same time. Like it's available. It's not hidden. It's
because as you speak, we keep getting these glimpses. We can get these glimpses because you've articulated this brilliantly. We get these glimpses. You're coming back to the same themes. So it's just fascinating.
It is, yeah.
I'm going to meditate. I'm going to meditate now for another 5 years.